بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين. Welcome all. I hope you are doing great and safe. This is Akram Sulaiman, a certified IT engineer, trainer, and consultant. I have been working in IT industry for more than 15 years. And one of my passions is to enable both organizations and individuals to fully utilize the latest IT technologies. And in line to that passion, this educational video was created. The aim of this video is to give an overview about a very interesting technology in IT known as virtualization technology, and about Hyper-V, which is a specific implementation of this technology from Microsoft. To make this overview simple for any person to understand, I will not use any technical jargon. So whether you are an IT professional or a non-IT guy, still you can benefit from this video. So please watch this video till the end so that you have an idea about this technology. This technology has a huge impact in IT industry. Most of the applications and websites, they are running at the top of this technology. So knowing the basic concept about this technology is a big plus for you, whether you are an IT or non-IT. Of course, for IT people, they may want more deep detail, and I can do other videos if you ask me, but the aim of this video now is to give an overview, concept and fundamental about this technology, because knowing the fundamental is very important before you go to the deep technical details. Because if you don't have a very solid foundation, believe me, you cannot understand the advanced topic. So I am a firm believer that the basics and the fundamentals should be understood very well for in any field, actually, not in IT field, for any field. Now, for those people who are not good in English, I will do this video in Arabic language, inshallah, I hope, so that many people, they can benefit from it. I want from you, please, to participate in the comment section of this video so that I know my audience about their experience, about their level of experience specifically in this field. So I hope if you can participate, and by at least by answering these questions or any feedback. So for example, the first one, have you ever heard or knew about virtualization technology? And normally we type it VT. Have you ever heard about or used Microsoft Hyper-V in the past? Because I know some people, they know Microsoft, of course, the very famous company, but the term Hyper-V is very strange. And even for some IT people, I came across some IT professionals, they don't know what's Hyper-V. And it is not their mistake. Maybe their job title or the job role doesn't need to have a very good information or anything about this. But believe me, as an IT, at least you should know what is Hyper-V. And we will do this in the video. Then, have you ever used any other competitive product or solutions other than Hyper-V? So please try to share all this information in the video comments, and let me know if you want more details, or should I do another practical video about this technology and Hyper-V. You are more than welcome. So by the end of this video, inshallah, you will be able to describe the virtualization technology, define type 1 hypervisor and type 2 hypervisor. Don't worry about this gibberish. If you don't understand what's type 1, what's hypervisor, things will be clear during the video, so please keep watching. Then you will be able to define Microsoft Hyper-V, which is a product from Microsoft. Then identify Microsoft Hyper-V flavors, features, and benefits. You will see that hypervisor comes with different flavors, features, and benefits. So we will discuss this also. Then you will know that what are the deployment requirements. And last, I will show you how to enable this Hyper-V in Windows 10 operating system. Hopefully, by the end of the video, you will be able to do all these tasks. You will describe, you will define, identify, list, and enable. Now, to make things easy, I will start from the basics. Let us assume you bought a computer. Now, for the computer to work, there are three basic components. The first one is the hardware. And the hardware, as you know, these are the physical components inside the computer. And in this picture, this is a motherboard, this is the CPU, and this is the RAM, and this is a network card, and this is the mass storage, the hard disk drive. This, of course, the sample of hardware. There are many other hardware maybe in your system, such as sound card, graphic cards, other, but I just want to give you an idea. So this is the first component in any computer. You have the hardware, and normally they are inside the box of your computer. Now, my question, is it enough to have only the hardware, or we need other components? I hope you can answer that yes, we need more components. Of course, the next component that we need is the operating system. And in this picture, I am showing Windows 10 from Microsoft, but not necessarily from Microsoft or Windows 10, any operating system, such as Linux, Unix, all type of operating system. This is the second component. Now, normally the operating system, when you install it in your computer, it comes with built-in applications, but normally these applications are very simple application. So the third component normally we install third-party applications that the end user need to do his job. And for example, I give you an example here. One of the most famous application programs is the Microsoft Office Suite. I believe every computer in the companies, even at homes, they have these applications. And in this picture, I am showing Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, but also other application like, Adobe, Photoshop, Chrome, whatever application. So after you have all these components, the hardware, the operating system, and the application, then you can start working with your computer and you can do many tasks. Now, normally in IT, to explain these concepts, we draw this diagram to show the components. As you can see, here we have the hardware. Then at the top of the hardware, we install the operating system, and at the top of the operating system, we install the applications, just to simplify the things. Now, these layers applicable not only in the desktop computer, but also in the servers, because the servers are actually computers, but are normally more powerful than the desktop computer. So that's why we are using this diagram to show the hardware, the operating system, the application, and this applicable either for the desktop computers or for the servers. Now, just to give you an overview, the difference between desktop and server. The desktop is designed to be used by a single user at a time. And this is what most of the employees normally using to do their jobs, and even people at home. And of course, although the picture here, it shows a desktop or a tower-based computer, but this could also be a laptop. Now, on the other hand, we have the servers, which are computers, but normally more powerful than the desktop computers. Why? Because they are designed to handle many users at the same time. It could handle 10 users, it could handle 100, 1000 users at a time. So by nature, the server should be very powerful to be able to handle all these requests. Normally, we access the server through the network because we don't have a physical access to the server. Normally, the server computers, they are locked in the data center of any company. Of course, at home, we don't have servers unless you are an IT guru, okay? Maybe some IT, they have server even at home. But normally, server computers, they are used in the companies. But whether we are talking about server computer or desktop computer, this diagram is valid. Both computers have a hardware and the operating system and the application. But of course, the hardware in the server computer is more powerful than the hardware in the desktop. The operating system that we install on the server normally is different than the operating system we installed in the desktop. Also, the application themselves, normally the application that we install in the server, they are more powerful and they can handle multiple users at a time. Whereas the applications on the desktop computers, normally they are designed to work with a single user. But the idea, again, I am repeating, this applicable for both. Now, here where the virtualization technology comes in. Now let us assume you want to buy another server. As you know, many companies, they need more than one server to handle all the tasks or to divide the traffic between the servers. For example, some companies, they will make one server computer for hosting the website, and normally we call this the web server. Another server, maybe they use it for the mail management, we call it mail server. Another server, for example, for storing files, so we call it a file server. So normally the companies, they need more than one computer server. But of course, this is a very cost, and you have to have electricity, you have to have a cooling, everything. So this was the idea where the virtualization technology started. In a very basic term, in virtualization technology, instead of buying multiple physical computers, you can create what is known as virtual machines. And the virtual machines are nothing but a software where you can install it in your computer and they will work and behave like a physical computer. And that's why we call it virtual machines. And some people, they call it virtual PC or virtual computer. But the most common term, we use it in virtualization technology, virtual machine. So virtual machine, you can think of it, it's a computer, but it is running in a software. So for example, in this computer, I have a physical, this is the physical computer server. I can create many virtual machines and I can install on them operating system, and I can work with them as if they were real computers. Maybe the idea is very strange, but believe me, it is happening, and this is what is working in most of the servers that you are accessed day to day. We will come to this inshallah during the video. Now, this idea, again, you can do it on the desktop computer. So instead of buying multiple computers, you can create virtual machines and you can install operating system on them, and you can install application, and you can work with these as if they were separate computers. Now, to explain this more, let me show you the following picture. Now, this picture, it shows you here, this big box, this is a physical computer. And this physical computer, of course, it has the hardware, it has the operating system, and it has its own application. Now, inside this physical computer, as it's shown here, I have 6 virtual machines. I have created these virtual machines, and I can install operating system inside these machines, and I can install applications, and I can work with these virtual machines exactly as if they were real machines. Now, you may ask me, how do we do this? Is it by magic? No. There is a piece of software. You can install it in your physical computer, and once that software is in your computer, then you will be able to create the virtual machines and you can manage them, as we will see. But before I go there, we have some terminology we have to be familiar with from now on. So this physical computer that hosts the virtual machines, normally we call it the host computer. And the operating system that is installed in the physical computer, we call it host operating system. Now, sometimes we call it physical computer, sometimes real computer, okay? So this terminology, we refer to the big box that hold the virtual machines. Whereas these inside, we call them virtual machine, and the operating system inside them, we refer to them as guest operating systems. So for example, I may have here a Windows 10 operating system in my computer, physical computer, but in the virtual machine, I can install any operating system, whether it is 10 or Windows Server or Linux. So I can work with these as individuals and different computers. So this terminology is very important. So the host computer is the physical computer, and the virtual machine is the virtual machine. It is a machine, it is a computer, but by software, it's not physical. Of course, when you create these virtual machines, you can specify the hardware specification for each one. For example, how much RAM you want for this virtual machine, how much hard disk space, how many network cards, all these things, exactly like when you buy a new computer. You specify what is the CPU, how many hard disks, how much RAM you want, what is the operating system. When you buy a physical computer, you can do the same thing in the virtual machines. When you create a virtual machine, you can specify these, and it will work. Now, as I say, how do we do this magic word? There is a piece of software known as hypervisor. So this is the magic here. If you want to work with virtual machines, you have to install a piece of software known as hypervisor. And hypervisor, there are many different companies. They produce different type of hypervisor. We will come across to these, inshallah. But the most two famous companies that are specialized in this marketplace, the number one company, it's called VMware. VMware is the very big company in this market. They are doing many different hypervisor. The second company is Microsoft. We will see, inshallah, some example of this. So if you want to create virtual machines in your physical computer, you need a piece of software known as hypervisor. But hypervisor itself, we have two different types. We have a type 1 hypervisor and we have a type 2 hypervisor, as we'll see. Now, to make things easy, I just show this picture to give you an idea about what I am talking about, especially for people who are not familiar with this concept. Here in this picture, I have the big background here. This is my host operating system. This is the operating system that is installed in my physical computer. And I believe it's clear from the picture, it is a Windows 10. Then I install a hypervisor in this physical computer. After that, I created two virtual machines and I install on them again Windows 10. It is not a must to have the same operating system as my host operating system, but in this case, I install in them Windows 10. So this is my physical computer, this is my host computer, and this is the host operating system. And here I have two virtual machines, and as you can see, they are running, and I can access them, and I can work with them as if they were real. I hope this picture make it clear. I believe I have another picture. Yes, this one again. Here I have the physical operating system, the host, and again I have here two virtual machines running Windows 10, and they are running, and I can do anything with these virtual machines. So I hope by now you have a very basic idea about this technology. Now you may ask, why should I do this? Why don't I buy multiple physical computer and I install operating system and application? Well, I believe it is obvious. First, it is less expensive than to buy physical computer. You can have only one computer. You can install this hypervisor, which allow you to create virtual machines, and you can install on the virtual machine operating system and even the applications, and you can work with them as if they were physical computers. And the nice thing here, you can install applications and they are working independently of the operating system. I mean, when you install any software in this virtual machine, for example, and you start working with that, changing the settings, doing some formatting in the hard disk on this virtual machine, this will not affect your physical computer or your physical operating system. It only affects that virtual machine. It will not affect that virtual machine because these are two different virtual machines. Another thing, I can shut down this virtual machine and I can keep this running, or I can shut down both virtual machines. So I have full control. Okay, I think also things will be clear, inshallah, as we are progress. Now, the idea of virtualization and the virtual machines are used in two different environments. The first environment, individual settings, and the second environment in enterprise settings. So these are two different environments. Individual setting, I mean, you as an individual, you can use this technology at home. For example, especially for IT people, they may need more than one operating system to work with. So instead of buying different physical computers, for example, in this case, this guy has two computers, that's good. But suppose he want to run 4 different operating systems, or 5 or 6, he doesn't need to buy physical computer. He can buy, or already he has one extra here computer, for example. Let us assume this is his main computer and this is a second computer. He can install a hypervisor here. Then he can create virtual machines and he can work with these as if they were real computers. So you can work with this virtualization as an individual. But for companies, they again use virtualization technology to create hundreds of servers, but they are not real, they are virtual. I don't know whether you believe it or not. Most of the websites that you are accessing in your daytime, actually they are running on a virtual server, in a virtual machine. Because virtual machine, they have their own IP addresses, they can do exactly what a real computer can do. So a company, if they need, for example, 100 server, they will not have 100 physical servers. Maybe they have 10 physical servers, and the other 90 servers. Actually, they are virtual server running at the top of the 10 physical computer. So this technology is heavily used in enterprise settings, in companies, in corporations. Again, things will be clear as we move. Now, let us assume a company, they need 6 servers to do their traffic. Before the virtualization technology, they have to buy these physical computers and they have to install the operating system. They have to install the application in every server of these. Of course, this costs money, plus time and efforts, plus wiring, plus cooling. Now, utilizing this virtualization technology, what we can do, instead of buying these 6 computers and we pay a lot of money, we can only buy 2 computers. And the rest of the servers, we can create them as a virtual server, as it shows here. So, if we're using the virtualization technology, I can buy only 2 physical computers, and in the first one, I can create 2 virtual machines, and the second one, and I can create 2 virtual machines. So now I have an overall 6 virtual computers. 4 of them are virtual, and 2 of them are the physical. You see, this reduces the cost. This help the IT people to focus on to maintain only few number of physical computers. So it has many advantages, as we will see also. So this is one of the advantages of virtualization technology. Now, I know you have some questions. What about, let us assume I have a host computer here. This computer has an operating system. Normally, this computer, which I will host virtual machine, of course, it need to be very powerful. Because at the end, virtual machines, they will run at the top of this. So let me just give you an example. Now, suppose I create these virtual machines. I don't know how much, I think 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yes. So I have 10 virtual machines. They are created at the top of this physical computer, which is the host. Of course, as I said, in order to do that, you have to install the hypervisor. This is the piece of software that do all this magic. And we will come to that later now. But for this computer, the physical computer, to be able to run all these virtual machines, of course, the hardware specification of your computer should be very powerful. And specifically, there are 3 hardware components we should focus on. First, the CPU. The CPU should be very powerful. The second one is the RAM. And the third one is the hard disk. So these are the main hardware component or your host computer that you should pay attention to, and normally they should be very powerful. I don't care, for example, about sound card. I don't care about the graphic card. What I care is these 3 hardware components on your host computer. So when these are very powerful, you can create more and more virtual machines. Is that clear? Okay. Now, one question many students ask me, or many employees, they ask me all the time, what happens now if this computer break down and my virtual machines, they are all running on this computer? And this is a valid question. Of course, at the end, these virtual machines, they are running on this computer. And if something happened to this computer, of course, all your virtual machines, they will be down. So this is a pitfall of the virtualization technology. Actually, it's not a pitfall because this is by nature, because at the end, these virtual machines, they are running on this, and if this host computer is down, yes, for sure, all these virtual machines, they shut down also, and they break down. So, but how companies, they rely on this situation? Well, in the companies, normally, to avoid this scenario, to avoid the previous scenario, normally we don't work with a single server. Normally, we bring 2 or 3 servers. Like in this picture, we have 3 servers. Normally, they are very powerful and identical specification, although it's not a must, but it's recommended to have the same computer hardware specification and the same operating system. And we install the hypervisor, so they are all, and we can do some configuration so that these 3 servers, they work in what is called failover cluster. So it's a matter of configuration between these 3. I can configure them to so that they work as a cluster. A cluster, failover cluster, mean they share information between each other. So if one server is down, the other server, they can continue running the application. Now, after I do this, I can then create my virtual machines. So now these 3 host operating system, they share the workload. Now, what happens if I have one of these physical server breakdown? For example, what about if host 1 is a breakdown? Nothing will affect the virtual machine. The virtual machine now, they will continue running, but this time, instead of in 3 host computers, now they will run in 2 computers. Now the same thing now, again, I have another chance. If host 2, for example, for some reason or another, this is a breakdown, still all my virtual machines, they are running in host 3. Of course, host 3 will have more load and more job to do. So IT people, they shouldn't wait till the host 3 shut down also or break down. Of course, they have to fix the problem with the other host that they break down so that this continue running. So don't worry, most of the companies, they have more than one host server, and all their virtual machines, they were running without any problem. And believe me, many of the websites that you are accessing and application, they are run in virtual machines. Okay. This is very strange, but this is happening. This is what actually happening. And this is the idea of a cloud computing, where it started. Without virtualization technology, we don't have cloud computing. Now, what are the benefits for virtualization? Of course, cost reduction, easy administrations, testing and development. Many IT people, they use for testing a new operating system, new application. They check application compatibility. So you don't need physical computer to do this. You can create virtual machine, different operating system, and you can test and develop in this operating system in your single computer. Of course, in educational training and many schools and colleges now, they utilize this technology so that they can install different operating system on the same computer. What I mean here, suppose you have a computer lab and you have, for example, 20 computers. Normally, they have the same operating system, for example, Windows 10 or Windows 7 or Windows 8. But let us assume in that lab, you have some classes that they need to use Linux, or some other classes they need to use, for example, server operating system. So this was a challenge. But with the virtualization technology, what you can do, for each physical computer in the lab, you can install the hypervisor, and then you can install different virtual machines for different operating system. So when the student come, if this class is talking about Linux, they can run the virtual machine that running the Linux operating system. If another class come, another student come and he want to work with Windows operating system, he can run the virtual machine that has Windows operating system, and so on. And other benefit of this technology, that you are using a technology that will be used, in the future. And for example, cloud computing, I don't know if you are familiar with this. For IT people, sure they know this cloud computing paradigm is already based on this virtualization technology. So if we don't have this virtualization technology, we wouldn't have a cloud computing. Now, now let us talk about the hypervisor, which is the piece of software that enable us to create and manage these virtual machines. We have two types. We have type 1 and type 2. But I will start with type 2, as you can see here, because it's easy to understand. Then I will show type 1 hypervisor. So in type 2 hypervisor, I have to have a physical computer, the hardware, of course. And of course, at the top of the hardware, as you remember on the beginning of this video, we talk about the three components. You have to install the host operating system as usual. Now, if you want to start creating virtual machines, you have to install inside the host operating system here, you have to installing this piece of software, which is known as hypervisor. And specifically, it is called type 2 hypervisor. Now, once you install this piece of software, it's like any software that you install in your operating system. Okay? And we will see some example. After you create this hypervisor and it is inside your host operating system, now using this hypervisor, you can create virtual machines. For example, here I show 3 virtual machines. And then you can install operating system at the top of these virtual machines. And I can manage these virtual machines from the hypervisor. You get the point. So this type of hypervisor, we call it type 2. And I can work with this virtual machine. Of course, in this picture, I have only 3 virtual machines, but I can have more. It depends on how powerful my hardware is. This is, we call this type 2 hypervisor. Now, for example, let us assume you run this virtual machine, you install an operating system. Now let us assume this virtual machine wants something from the hardware. Maybe it will need to save file or to read a file, for example, from the hard disk. So normally the virtual machine should give the request to the hypervisor, type 2 hypervisor in this case, and the hypervisor, he cannot go directly to the hardware. He should give this message to the operating system. And the operating system itself can access the hardware. Now, the hardware, he will respond back to the operating system to the hypervisor, and from the hypervisor to the virtual machine. Of course, you as a user, you will not see this, but this is what actually happening. So, virtual machines cannot access the hardware directly, but through the hypervisor, and from the hypervisor through the operating system to the hardware. Now, as we will see now, type 1 hypervisor, the hypervisor itself is the one who is directly connected to the hardware, as we will see now. So, type 1 hypervisor now, again, you should have a hardware in your computer. Now, here is the difference between type 1 and type 2. In type 1 hypervisor, you don't need to have an operating system. You directly install the hypervisor itself at the top of the hardware. Now, in order to manage this hypervisor, of course, you have to have a piece of software. We call it a management OS. Through this, you can control the hypervisor. But the difference between type 1 hypervisor and the previous one, as you can see, type 1 hypervisor is now directly at the top of the hardware, and he can communicate directly without the hardware. He can directly communicate with the hardware without any need for any operating system. Now, since I have a hypervisor, again, I can create as much as I want virtual machine, and I can install operating system on the virtual machines. Now, this is type 1 hypervisor. Now, if the operating the virtual machine wants something from the hardware, it will send directly to the hypervisor, type 1 of course, and type 1 directly go to the hardware. He can access it. This is the difference between type 1 hypervisor and type 2 hypervisor. I believe this picture show again type 2 hypervisor and type 1 hypervisor. As you can see here, in type 2 hypervisor, you have the hardware, then you have operating system, and inside that operating system on the computer, you install the hypervisor. Then at the top of that, you can create virtual machines. Whereas in type 1 hypervisor, you see, when you install the hypervisor, so you see, now the virtual machines, if they want anything from the hardware, if you are using type 1 hypervisor, it will send the request to the hypervisor, and the hypervisor directly access the hardware. So this is the difference between type 1 hypervisor and type 2 hypervisor. Of course, from the discussion, surely you will notice that this means that type 1 hypervisor has more control on the hardware than type 2 hypervisor, because in type 2 hypervisor there is an intermediate between the hardware and the hypervisor, which is the operating system, whereas in type 1 the hypervisor is directly installed at the top of the hardware. So that's why normally type 1 hypervisor is used in the companies, in enterprise settings, in data centers, whereas type 2 hypervisor normally it's used in individual settings at home. So to make things clear, I will give some examples in type 2 hypervisor. So one of the product for type 2 hypervisor, it's called Microsoft Virtual PC. Although this is now old and very minimum basic features, but just for your information that we have a product known as Microsoft Virtual PC. But the famous one from VMware Workstation, which is VMware Workstation Pro. This is from VMware company. So VMware Workstation Pro is a type 2 hypervisor. So in other words, if you want it, you have to have an operating system and you install it in your operating system as if you are installing any type of application. Then you will have type 2 hypervisor. Then you can create your virtual machines. Of course, this is not free. I think they give you a trial period for 30 days and then you have to pay for that. And it is very powerful type 2 hypervisor. Now, the third, maybe many of who is watching this video, they already know about it, which is called Oracle VirtualBox. This is very nice type 2 hypervisor. Many students, many IT people, they install it in their computer because it's free. It's from Oracle, and it is, you know, it has very good features. I believe it is even, of course, it will not have the same features as the VMware Workstation Pro because this is a paid version, but still it is very easy to use. I highly advise you to use that if you want to practice virtual machines and to create virtual machines, to use this software. Now, so most of the people who are working in virtualization, and I believe I met many IT, they are only aware of this type of hypervisor of virtual machine, which is type 2. But what about type 1? What products we have? Of course, let me just list you. This is where Microsoft Hyper-V comes. You see, this Microsoft Hyper-V, so Hyper-V is a hypervisor and it is of type 1. It's not type 2. The second one, again, VMware, which is the same company for Workstation Pro, and they have a specific product. It's called vSphere, and the old name is called ESXi. These are type 1 hypervisor. And we have another open source type 1 hypervisor, Citrix Zen server. Actually, I'm not sure if it is free or not. Okay, you can comment in the video comment section. Let us know. Of course, also we have the Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization. So you see, these names, normally we don't use it at home. Normally these names, they are used in enterprises and in data centers of the companies. And that's why it's type 1. They are type 1. They are more powerful than type 2. I hope by this time you know the difference between type 2 and type 1, and you can give some example of type 2 and some example of type 1. And please know, here is where Microsoft Hyper-V is classified. It is type 1 hypervisor. Again, I will, you see type 1 here. It says it is a feature rich and enjoy much better performance than type 2. And normally it is used in a virtualized enterprise production environments. This is the type of hypervisor where it is used in data center for enterprise companies and cloud computing providers. Whereas type 2, normally it is used for testing, development, training, and personal purposes. So you as an individual, if you want to practice virtual machine, you can use type 2 hypervisor, and I give an example of that, and I highly recommend the one which is from Oracle VirtualBox. But you will be surprised now to tell you that you can also use type 1 because it's already come built in with the Windows operating system, whether the server or the client with Microsoft, of course, Hyper-V, as we will see. So if one asks you now, what is Microsoft Hyper-V? I think you can answer. Microsoft Hyper-V is a Microsoft Type 1 hypervisor. And the hypervisor, what's a hypervisor? It is the virtualization platform. It is the piece of software that is used to build, host, and manage your virtual machines. So if I ask you this and I give you this definition at the beginning of the video, you may not understand what I mean by these terminologies. But now I believe it's clear for you. Again, this picture. Now, as you can see here, it gives an example of Hyper-V hypervisor. Now, one question to test your knowledge. Now, is this type 2 or type 1 hypervisor? What do you think? Yes, you are right. It is type 1 hypervisor. Why? Because the hypervisor is directly installed in the hardware. There is no operating system here. And these are virtual machine. As you can see, each virtual machine here, it has its own OS and application. Here again, the same thing. And I can work with this virtual machine independently. I can shut down this, for example, virtual machine. I can restart that one. I can you know, do whatever, and they are totally isolated environment. Now, what about Microsoft Hyper-V flavors? We know now Hyper-V is a type 1 hypervisor. But how to get this Hyper-V? Sorry. We have what is called server Hyper-V and client Hyper-V. So both of them are type 1, of course, because they are Hyper-V. But server Hyper-V, from its name, normally it comes built in with the server operating system from Microsoft, whereas client Hyper-V, it comes built in with the client operating system from Microsoft. Server Hyper-V, it's first released alongside with Microsoft Server 2008, in 2008, of course. Whereas client Hyper-V, it first released built in with the Microsoft Windows 8 in 2012. So this is very strange. Many people, they don't know that if they have Windows 8, they have Hyper-V already built in, but normally they are not, it is not enabled by default, so you have to enable it if you want to create virtual machine, as we will see. Of course, server Hyper-V, server from its name, it's only installed in Microsoft Server operating system only, whereas a client Hyper-V, it's installed on Microsoft Client operating system. Of course, since this is installed in server operating system, it has feature-rich product. In client Hyper-V, it's working, no problem, but in some advanced features are missing compared to the server Hyper-V. This is server Hyper-V is the one that is used in companies, in data centers, in cloud computing providers. Client Hyper-V, although it is type 1, but normally it is used for testing, development, training, and personal purposes. So you can, if you have a laptop that has a Windows 8 or Windows 8.1 or 10, of course, you have this Hyper-V, and I will show you how to enable it. So again, if you have Windows Server, you have Hyper-V, of course, server Hyper-V, and if you have Windows, you have a client Hyper-V. But let us assume you don't have operating system. You don't want to buy this operating system, and you want to use the Hyper-V. Of course, you can get that one free of charge. You can only download this Hyper-V. It's called Hyper-V Server 2016. You can download it for free, and you can install it in any computer, and then you can create virtual machines. So you don't need to buy any license for to enable Hyper-V. But it is easier to have the operating system and then to enable it from within the operating system, as we will see inshallah for Windows 10. Now, server Hyper-V, again, as I said, it comes with the server operating system from Microsoft. Of course, it starts with Server 2008. Again, it is available in 2008 R2, in 2012, Windows Server 2012 R2, and Windows Server 2016, and the latest and the greatest, Windows Server 2019. So if you have this operating system, this means you have the server Hyper-V, and you can enable it as a role in the operating system. Now, for the client Hyper-V, it first starts with Windows 8, but again, you can find it in Windows 8.1 and for sure in Windows 10. Now, very important point. Hyper-V, if you want to use Hyper-V in Windows 10, for example, it is only included in professional editions and above. So it is not available in home edition. So if you have a Windows 10 home edition, you don't have this. You have to have a Windows 10 professional, enterprise, and above. And only it's included in 64-bit version. If you have a Windows 10 which is 32-bit version, again, it is not available. So you see, it has very strict requirements, because Microsoft, they say either you work in virtualization in the right way or leave it. What I mean by right way, they want to make sure that you have a very good Windows edition. It should be professional edition, enterprise edition, not home edition, plus 64-bit. Now, a very important concept about licensing. As I said, virtual machine, it works exactly like a real computer. And even Microsoft, they ask or they charge for a license. If you want to install an operating system in a virtual machine, you have to buy a license for that. So you cannot say, I am running this in a virtual machine, so I don't need I don't need a license. No, you have to buy a license for every virtual machine you run. But of course, with Windows, when you buy, for example, let us assume you have a physical computer and you buy a license for Windows Server 2016 standard. For example, in this case, this is the standard edition 2016. So you are eligible to install this operating system in the physical computer. And because it is Windows Server 2016, you can enable the Hyper-V. In this case, it's Server Hyper-V, and you can create virtual machines. Now, in these virtual machines, you can install again Windows Server, but Microsoft, they give you free license for these virtual machines. Since you already bought the Windows license for this edition, they give you a license also they allow you to install this operating system in the virtual machines that you can create in this computer. But how many virtual machines you can install in this computer, and you can install this without paying any money to the Microsoft? Well, if it is a standard edition, you are eligible for 2 free virtual machine license. You see? So if you buy this Windows Standard Edition server, you can install it in your physical computer, and then you can enable Hyper-V. After that, you can create 2 virtual machines, and you can install the same copy of the Windows server with the same product key in these 2 virtual machines. And if you use that, you are legal with Microsoft. Now, if you want to create a 3rd virtual machine, in that case, you have to pay for the 3rd virtual machine license. You get the point. Now, what about if you bought here Windows Server 2016 standard, or sorry, data center? Of course, you know, data center is normally more expensive than standard. Now, in this case, since you bought this license, you can install this in your physical computer, and then you can enable the Hyper-V, and then Microsoft give you unlimited license for virtual machines. So you can, in other words, you can create as much as you want in this computer, and you can install the Windows data center inside these virtual machines. So there is no limit. It's not like the standard. The standard, you are eligible for 2 virtual machines. You may now wonder how it could be, how Microsoft then makes money. Now, theoretically, it is unlimited. You can create unlimited number of virtual machines on this computer, and you can install this operating system server inside this virtual machine, and Microsoft, they will not make any problem with you. But the question is, physically, how many virtual machines you can run at the top of this physical computer and the performance will not drop? This is the question. So Microsoft, they catch you from that side. So although by license terms, you can install as much as you can, but physically you cannot. Every physical computer has a limit. In this case, it depends on how powerful your computer is. You can install, for example, 10 or 20 or 30, let us assume, virtual machines, and you can install. In that case, Microsoft, they don't have a problem. But just as a marketing, you know, they telling that, you know, if you buy the data center edition, you have unlimited license for the virtual machines. But again, actually in real life, you cannot have unlimited virtual machine running in your physical computer. I believe you get the point. Now, let us see how things work from the client operating system. So let us assume now you have a computer and you bought Windows 10 operating system. So what do you think? Of course, if it is Windows 10 Pro, as we will see, you can enable the Hyper-V. But are you legal to create virtual machine and install the same Windows license? Well, because it's a client, Microsoft, they don't give you this license. So if you buy Windows 10 Pro for your physical computer, you can install it in your physical computer. You can enable Hyper-V and you can create a virtual machine. But if you want to install a Windows in that virtual machine, you have to buy another license. You cannot use the same license that you buy in the virtual machine. This is a restriction from Microsoft. So you see, when you have a virtual machine, from Microsoft perspective, they consider it as a physical computer. It has to have a license. Now let us see. Let us assume we have a Hyper-V and we create virtual machines. Now, what guest operating system you can install in the virtual machines? Well, you can install a client operating system, of course, 86 and 64-bit. You can install from Windows XP Professional Surface Pack 3. You can install as a guest, I mean, in the virtual machines. Windows Server Business Enterprise Ultimate with Surface Pack 2. Windows 7 Professional Enterprise Ultimate with Surface Pack 2. Of course, you have Windows 8, 8.1, and Windows 10. So what I mean is, you can install any one of these operating systems in your virtual machines. And in that case, this will be guest operating system. So you have a variety of operating system, and all these operating system, they are client operating system. Now, can I install server operating system in my virtual machines? Pay attention, gentlemen. I'm not talking about the physical operating system. I'm talking about the virtual machines. What type of operating system you can install in the virtual machines? Now, in the server, yes, you can install. You can install in the virtual machine Windows Server 2003 Surface Pack 2 and Windows Server 2003 R2 Release 2. And of course, forward Windows Server 2008, Windows Server 2008 R2. Again, Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2, and Windows Server 2016, and the latest Windows Server 2019. What I mean is this: if you have a laptop which has a Windows 10 and you enable Hyper-V, you can create virtual machine, and inside that virtual machine you can install any operating system, whether it's a client or a server. And that is a very interesting. So if you have a Windows 10 laptop, you can create a virtual machine, for example, and you can install inside it Windows Server 2019. Windows Server 2016, and you work with that operating system as if it's a real computer. Now, many people ask me, can I install Linux operating system on these virtual machines which are created by Hyper-V? Since Hyper-V is a Microsoft-centric product, they wonder whether they can install the Linux or not. Of course, yes. So here we have operating systems, Linux operating system. You can install it in your virtual machines which are run at the top of Hyper-V. You see, most of the Linux distributions, you can install them in the virtualization, in the virtual machines. You see, Kali or the backtrack, and Ubuntu, Red Hat, SUSE, CentOS, FreeBSD, Debian, Oracle, all these operating system, Linux, you can install them in the virtual machine at the top of Hyper-V. So very interesting. Myself, I use it a lot of time to test, for example, some operating system, whether Windows or Linux. Now, if you want to enable the Hyper-V in Windows 10, there are some requirements. Of course, Windows 10 editions that you can enable Hyper-V, client Hyper-V, it's Windows 10 Pro, Windows 10 Pro for workstation, Windows 10 Pro education, Windows 10 education, and Windows 10 enterprise. Maybe some of you are not aware of these editions. Some people, they only know Windows 10 Pro, Windows 10 Enterprise, and Windows Home. As you can see in this list, we don't have the Home. Only, by the way, only from Pro and above. If you have in your laptop one of these editions of Windows 10, you can enable Hyper-V. But that's not enough. Also, your edition should be 64-bit of Windows edition, because 32-bit edition are not supported in Hyper-V. What I mean is, even if you have a Windows 10 Pro, but it is not 64, it is 32-bit, again, you cannot enable Hyper-V. If you want Hyper-V to be enabled in your laptop or desktop and you have a Windows 10, as I said, it should be Windows 10 Pro and above. Plus, that edition should be 64-bit edition of Windows 10. And of course, you have to have a user account with administrator privilege to enable the client Hyper-V. So, one of many questions I ask from the employees and my friends, what about if my laptop has a Windows 10 Home Edition? And unfortunately, many computer, when you buy them, laptop especially, normally it comes pre-installed with Windows 10 Home. In that case, unfortunately, you cannot enable this client Hyper-V in this Windows 10. So forget about Hyper-V. But what I advise them is they can go to type 2 hypervisor, not type 1. And I advise them to use the Oracle VirtualBox. But if you want to use Hyper-V, make sure that your computer come with either Pro and above all these powerful editions. Now, again, client Hyper-V, you have to have your computer itself, the hardware of your physical laptop. It should have, again, a 64-bit processor with the following features. Maybe these are some terminology, jargon, IT, technical terminology. Your CPU, this, to make it in a nutshell, most of our CPU nowadays, they have all these technologies. They have SLAT, which is second level address translation. It depends on that CPU, in your CPU. If it is Intel, it's called EBT. If it is AMD, it's called RVI. The CPU should have a feature called data execution prevention, DEP, and it has this feature, VM monitor. Without going into deep detail, let me tell you this. Most of the CPU of your laptop and computers that they are available in the market, the CPU support all these things. Not only that, also your BIOS or the firmware BIOS or UFI of your computer should support what is called hardware assisted virtualization. And again, almost all laptops that produced 5 years, before, these days, or even 5 years ago, they have this technology. If you have very old laptop, maybe your BIOS or your UFI is not supporting this technology. So in that case, you cannot run Hyper-V, even if you have a 64-bit processor and the appropriate Windows 10 edition. Even if you fulfill all these requirements, but your BIOS, your UFI, your firmware of your laptop is not supporting this, you cannot run Hyper-V. Now, what's the fix for that? Again, you can go to the hypervisor type 2, and specifically VirtualBox from Oracle. Of course, in the firmware, in the BIOS, you can go to the BIOS and you can search for this terminology. It depends on the manufacturer of your laptop. Sometimes some laptop or desktop manufacturer, they call it VT or VTX, VTD or AMD-V. So make sure these features are enabled in your BIOS before you enable the Hyper-V. Normally, you should have at least, of course, a 4 gig RAM. Now, the question is, how do we enable Hyper-V in Windows 10? Let us assume my laptop, the firmware or the BIOS support this technology and it is enabled. You install Windows 10 Pro and above as edition, and it's a 64-bit. So if you fulfill all these requirements, then you are able to enable Hyper-V in Windows 10. But how do you enable it? Well, we have a very simple command from the Windows PowerShell. I write it here. I type it here for you. You just go to the Windows PowerShell as administrator, of course, and you just type that command. And I think it's written here. And once you press it, enter, all of a sudden the Hyper-V is enabled. From this moment, you can start creating your virtual machines and you start working with your virtual machines. So the first way to enable Hyper-V in Windows 10 through Windows PowerShell through this command. Now another way, again from PowerShell, but this time we use another command. It's called dism. I don't know if you are familiar with this command. I will not go deep detail, but I give you the command that specifically enable Hyper-V in Windows 10. Again, you run the PowerShell as administrator, and then you type this command. Again, I think it's written here. And when you press enter, it will install or it will enable the Hyper-V. So these two ways from the CLI command line interface. But if there is also, if you are not very good in CLI, Microsoft through Windows 10, you can enable Hyper-V through the Windows feature dialog box. When you access that one, and you can find how to access it, then you go to this tick mark here, Hyper-V checkbox. By default, you don't have this tick here. If you want to enable a Hyper-V, you just put tick mark in this box. And inside this, underneath this, we have two things here. Both of them should have the tick mark. Now, one of the most common problem, many people come to me and ask me that they can tick this one, but they cannot tick that one, Hyper-V platform. So they will not have a full tick mark here. Actually, in this case, what does this mean? This means that you have a very good Windows 10 edition. It's a Pro and above, it's 64-bit, but you cannot tick here. If you cannot tick here, put a tick mark here, this means that your BIOS is not enabling this feature. So you have to restart your computer, you go to the BIOS and you search for the setting that's related to the virtualization technology and make sure it is enabled. If your BIOS doesn't have that feature, you forget Hyper-V. You cannot run. But many people, when I tell them this, they actually go to the BIOS and really they find that feature, but unfortunately it's not enabled. And most of the laptops that come from the factory, they disable this feature from the BIOS for security reasons. So you have to go to the BIOS and you enable it. Now, what about if again, some IT and some people ask me, I have Windows 10 64-bit, it's a Pro and above. I have the BIOS, sorry, not the Pro, I have Windows 10 and it is in the BIOS. I have this feature for virtualization, but if I want to turn on the virtual Hyper-V and I come here, I don't see this Hyper-V. If you don't see Hyper-V, this means that the Windows edition, the Windows 10 edition, in your computer is the home edition. And we said in home edition, it will not work. At least your Windows 10 should be Pro and above. I hope this is very clear. Again, these are the three ways to install or to enable the Hyper-V. Now, the last topic, I believe, there is in Hyper-V, you can create what we refer to them virtual switch types. We have three: bridge switch, local switch, and private switch. This is more technical. Maybe the IT people, they can understand me, but for non-IT people, they may have difficulty in understanding this. But anyway, I will try my best. I left with one slide with one picture. I will show you and try to help you to understand what we mean by bridge switch, local switch, and private. So let me go to a picture now. Excellent. As you can see, maybe the IT people, they are very familiar with this type of diagram. For non-IT people, please don't worry. Just hold with me, and if you want, you just continue listening to me. Now, in this picture, as you can see, this is my here is a small home office network. You maybe have a network like this at home. Some IT people I know, they have this type of network at home. But let us assume you are working in a company, and a very small company. They have a physical switch here, and they have connected to that PC, employees PC. Here even we have a PDA printer. Of course, then we have a server here. We have a server, router, and from the router through the ISP, we have the internet. Now, in this scenario, the IT guy, he enable Hyper-V in this server. So this means that he want to use the Hyper-V as a type 1 hypervisor, and he create here as a sample 4 virtual machines. Now, he can create something like this switch. This is a physical switch. We can create the same analogy virtual switch inside the Hyper-V. So Hyper-V give you this feature that you can create a virtual switch. But we have 3 types. It depends what you want to do. Now, if you want to connect these 4, for example, virtual machines inside a single LAN by themselves, isolated from the Hyper-V host itself and the other network. You want just a switch where you can connect all these virtual machines together, and they want to make a LAN only between these virtual machines. In that case, you create the type which is known as private switch through the Hyper-V. Inshallah, if I make another video, I will show this practically. You create a private switch, and inside the virtual machines, you make some configuration that you connect all these virtual machines to the private switch, and in that case, they can communicate with each other. You can ping, you can do testing between these computers, and you can do your own testing. But you cannot ask the the host or the external network. They can only work together, and this is if you create a private switch. Now, if you want instead these virtual machines to work together and communicate with each other, plus with the server that are running at the top, in this case, you create what we call local switch. You create a local switch here, and you connect your virtual machines to that local switch, and your host, Hyper-V host, again is connected by default to that local switch. In this case, all your virtual machines will be able to communicate and ping with the host, the Hyper-V host computer, and the host computer can communicate with these virtual machines. But that's it. That's it. Virtual machine, they can communicate only among each others and the Hyper-V host. Now, if you want your the virtual machine to be able to communicate not only among themselves only, and not only with the Hyper-V host, but also with any computer in the external network, or even you want virtual machines to access the internet. Okay, maybe many people they don't know this. I can access the internet through the virtual machine if I have internet. But here, what you have to create what we call bridge switch. You create a bridge switch in Hyper-V host, and you connect your virtual machines to the bridge switch. And in that case, these virtual machines, they will be able to communicate between each others, plus with the host itself, plus with any computer in the external physical network. Even they can go to the internet. So I know many people, especially the IT, they serve the internet not from real computers, but actually they do uh, virtual machine, and they access the internet through a virtual machines, so that if they have attacked or virus attack themselves computer, it will not affect real computer, it will affect a virtual machine. And virtual machine, simply he can discard or he can delete because it's a virtual. So I hope this make clear the difference between private switch, local switch, and a bridge switch. I will not go deep detail. I just give you a brief introduction about these switches. If you want, please let me know in the comments. I can go more details, and I can give more information about this. Now, by the end, please accept my appreciation for your listening to me. I hope you find this video useful for you. At least you have now a general overview about virtualization technology, what is it about it, and how we can use it, how we enable it, different terminology. Then about the Hyper-V from Microsoft, and I show you how to enable it and a brief requirements. So you have, I believe now, a general background about virtualization technology and Hyper-V. So when you attend any conferences, when you attend any meeting and anybody start talking about virtualization, virtual machines, now you can understand what they are talking about. I hope it is a very pleasure for you, this video, as it was a pleasure for me to create it for you. My passion is to share this information with many of you. I hope I hope you find this useful. Thank you for listening. And if you want more information, and if you want me to do the practical side to show you how to really enable the Hyper-V, then how to create virtual machines, then how to install the operating system, then how to install the application, how to make a network between them, how to communicate, please let me know this, and inshallah I will do my best to do it for you. Thank you so much. And I hope you write your comments. Please share this video and my channel to all people you know, whether they are IT or non-IT, so that they can benefit from this. Thank you so much.